Hello, everyone. We're going to give it a few, well, maybe a minute or so, so people can join, and then we'll get started. Well, we seem to be slowing down a bit. So we've got a busy agenda today, so I think we will get started. Um, so welcome everyone to today's C4 DISC webinar, Integrating Values Around DEIA and Sustainability Development Goals. This is coordinated with SSP. I'm Lori Kaplan, Senior Manager of Content at Clarivate. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to review. Attendees' microphones have been muted automatically. Please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to enter questions for the moderator and panelists. You can also use the chat feature to communicate directly with other participants and the organizers. Remember to select everyone to share your chat message with attendees. Closed captions have been enabled. If you don't see the CC icon on your toolbar, you can view captions by selecting the More option on your screen and then Captions in the drop-down menu. This 1-hour session will be recorded and available to all on the C4 DISC YouTube channel in the next few days. A quick note on code of conduct and today's meeting. We are dedicated to creating a harassment-free community for everyone, regardless of gender, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, ethnicity, religion or lack thereof, or other group status. C4 DISC will not tolerate harassment of or by members or guests of the community in any form. We have 3 wonderful speakers for this panel. Dana Compton is the publisher at ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineers. William Deluise is the Corporate Vice President, Communications and Corporate Impact at Wiley. And Salmia Swaminathan is the Director of DEI Research Publishing at Springer Nature. The idea for this webinar has been in the SSP plan for over a year, and we are thrilled to be presenting it today. The DEIA and education committees work together to find speakers to represent a cross-section of publishers engaged with DEIA and the United Nations SDGs. In today's global landscape, the scholarly publishing industry is increasingly recognizing the necessity to integrate into their organizational frameworks the values centered around diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and sustainability, including the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We will explore the mechanisms and strategies employed by our speakers' organizations to incorporate these values into their objectives and activities. From their perspectives, this session will underscore the significance of integrating DEIA and sustainability values into organizational structures, highlighting the various ways of fostering innovation, resilience, and positive societal impact. Our format today will be opening remarks from the three panelists, followed by a roundtable discussion, brief closing remarks, and time for questions from the attendees before we close. So without further delay, we will start the opening remarks with Soumya, followed by Bill, and then Dana. Soumya?
Thank you, Laurie. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. So before I tell you about the programs across Springer Nature, just want to give you a little bit of a background into the organization. So we are a multidisciplinary publisher. We publish over 3,000 journals and about 14,000 books per year. Just to give you a sense of the scale that we work across, we work with around 180,000 academic editors and 1 million peer reviewers per year. We're a global organization, so we're operating across 40 countries or regions around the world. From our perspective, we believe that sustainability, the SDGs and DEI are absolutely critical to our organizational culture. They're really key to how we serve our research communities and how we as a publisher can contribute to finding research solutions to the world's most urgent problems. So we are really set up with 4 distinct programs that touch on the internal and external aspects of DEI, sustainability, and then the SDGs. So on the DEI side, there are really 2 strands to the DEI work that we undertake. One is an internal focus, and internally the program is focused on building an inclusive, diverse, and vibrant organizational culture where everyone can thrive. I'll just touch on 4 key initiatives that sit under the internal DEI program. So one is our employee networks. We have 10 employee networks. They're absolutely core to the program, and they're built around a shared identity, allyship, or a common goal. These networks are open to everyone across the organization. Under the internal DEI program, we also run an annual global inclusion and diversity survey that's designed to help us better understand our colleagues' experience of inclusion. And then 2 other key initiatives that sit under the internal DEI program is our DEI learning journey, which touches on many different aspects of inclusion in the workplace, and our Opening Doors internship program, which is a paid opportunity for recent graduates and students to gain experience in research and science publishing. Externally, on the research publishing side, and that's the program that I lead, our efforts are really focused on working toward better reflecting the diversity of the global research community within our networks of academic editors, reviewers, and authors. We also think about the kind of topics we cover, and more generally, really championing global inclusivity in the research community. So within the external program, using data-informed insights to create awareness and to drive action is a major focus of the work we do. 2 examples of that approach that I'd like to just mention briefly is last year we published our first baseline report looking at the geographic and inferred gender diversity of our external academic editors. And not surprisingly, that report confirmed what we know to be true across the industry, which is that the diversity of editorial decision makers is not really representative of the diversity of the global research community, and that we as an industry have to do a lot more to address this. I'll tell you about a second report that we published earlier this year, and that report looked at gender representation across the publication journey within the Nature portfolio group of journals and the positive impact that editors can have on gender representation. So I can tell you more about how these reports have really allowed us to raise awareness as well as take action on the learnings from the data and the insights we've gained. So another really key aspect that we focus on in the context of the external DEI program is understanding and addressing implicit bias in the publication journey. So over the last couple of years, we've run a number of workshops on implicit bias in the publication journey across our global offices for our publishers and editors and for our external academic editors. And finally, the last focus that I just want to mention is that over the past 5 years, we've developed a number of resources for our internal editors and publishers and for our external editors that can help support more inclusive publishing practice. So just switching now to talk about the sustainability and the SDG programs. On the sustainability front, we're really focused on an approach that minimizes our impact on the environment as a business. So for example, we've been carbon neutral in our direct operations since 2020, and we have a goal to be net zero by 2040, including in our value chain. In terms of the SDGs, as a publisher, we think our most significant contribution is advancing SDGs in our publications, so in the research we publish. And last year we passed a major milestone in publishing more than 1 million articles and book chapters related to the SDGs since 2015. More than half of our SDG-related articles are open access, which means that they are read and shared easily across academia and beyond, and can be really built on and translated into practice. In 2024, we also began highlighting journals where at least 50% of the articles are SDG related, and that's around a fifth of our journal titles. And this really raises the visibility within the research community for specific journals that are focused on knowledge creation around the goals. We have also, over the past few years, held numerous really impactful events, including Science for a Sustainable Future with the UN that convenes experts to demonstrate how impactful SDG research can be. So from the perspective of how we are set up organizationally, structurally, we're really set up as 4 distinct programs, but they work very closely together. They collaborate and they're embedded within the organizational structure. All 4 of the programs are overseen by dedicated staff members, which is, I think, unusual in the industry to actually have dedicated staff, but that has been crucial to the success of the programs. And we're also supported by a really energetic network of colleagues who volunteer their time and effort on these programs. And just want to give you one of the ways that we collaborate and celebrate the efforts made across Springer Nature. Every year we hold a SDG Impact Festival and awards. And the intent is to really celebrate and reward colleagues whose efforts have helped Springer Nature advance on the SDGs, DEI, and sustainability. And then secondly, to also really embed a focus on sustainability and DEI into the fabric of the organization. So with that, I'll stop and pass on to the next person.
Me, I think I'm going next. That was really great. That was really interesting. I learned a lot. So yeah, thanks so much for it. I'm Bill DeLuise. I lead Wiley's Corporate Impact Program, which is our corporate social responsibility, environmental social governance, and inclusion in community offices. Um, I figure when I was thinking about how to kick things off for me today, one of the things that struck me is that if you're here, we probably share a perspective on whether or not it's good for businesses and organizations to do good in the world. Like if you're showing up for a webinar on this topic, you probably believe, like a lot of us do, that businesses have a responsibility to do good in the world while doing good for their shareholders. And I love that. I love that that is what drives a lot of us. It's what's driven me into this work. I think it's really important, though, to recognize that this is not just a moral imperative, it's a business necessity. The science on this is super clear. You can't sustain an organization commercially if you're working in a way that hurts the planet or communities that you're operating in. There was one study I really liked, the cumulative value of a lost market value over a 5-year period of companies in the US because of environmental, social, or governance controversies or issues was over $530 billion of lost market value. Oxford University had a really interesting study. It was a meta-analysis actually of 200 studies that concluded that 88% of companies that had robust environmental governance and social practices show better operational performance. Bank of America said that companies that invest in environmental, social, and governance activities pay up to 2% less on debt. Purpose-driven companies grow 3 times faster than competitors. According to Deloitte, the science here, the research here is really, really sound. And that says kind of unequivocally that investing in environmental and social sustainability and inclusion initiatives drives positive business performance. And that's been really important to the way that I think about this type of work. I came to this type of work through like a series of very fortunate events. I spent the first 20 years of my career all at Wiley, which is, a global publishing company. We have offices all around the world. We publish about 2,000 journals, tens of thousands of books in our backlist. And I've spent, as of tomorrow, actually 25 years with the organization, mostly in publishing roles, traditional publishing roles, publishing, editorial. I did some strategy. I did some business development. I worked in marketing for a little while. So, I don't have a background in traditional sustainability management, in culture. But, through what really were like a series of happy accidents, I had the opportunity to lead these programs. And coming in with fundamental knowledge of the business, of the industry, was really useful. And it's colored this perspective I have that, sustainability, inclusion initiatives, commitments to the SDGs, they shouldn't be generic. They shouldn't be something that could happen at any company or any organization in the world. They should be very grounded in your actual business, in your mission, in your organization's purpose in the world. So one of the questions that we ask ourselves and that, a lot of people in roles like this are asking is how well do we understand the intersection between our business model and our potential impact on society and on the planet? A tool that we use to help us articulate that intersection is a process called a materiality assessment, or in our case, a double materiality assessment. We like to identify topics. We go through this very structured research and analysis program that identifies those topics that are related to the environment, to society, or to our governance practices that have a direct financial impact on the business, that are like financially material, and those ESG topics that have where our operations have a material impact on the world at large, on society and on the planet. And this creates for us a set of bespoke priorities, things that are super relevant to the business that we're operating in, the type of organization that we are. And at that point, we look at their relationship to the SDGs. It's how we prioritize the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that we'll be acting on, is to create that mapping between our material topics, our topics in terms of financial materiality and impact materiality, and their relationship to the SDGs. So all of that informs our sustainability and inclusion strategies. Um, when we work to put those into action, we're doing many of the same things that you just heard coming out of Springer Nature. We have dedicated functions um, committed to inclusion, an Office of Inclusion and Community, an Office of Environmental Sustainability and ESG. We have a very robust set of volunteers across the organization. Like our employee resource group programs, we also have 10 of them and counting. Actually, there's a new one. Don't tell anyone, it hasn't been announced yet. New one coming this summer. And we have, in our case, board level oversight. Wiley's a publicly traded company. It's overseen by a board of directors. We have board level oversight of our ESG and inclusion and community activities. I think that's really critical because it ensures that there is not only alignment, but also interest at every level of the organization. The way that we go about operationalizing these programs is to take an approach that creates multiple entry points for people. People who are super committed and want to make it part of their day job have mechanisms to do that. We have formal programs, with accountability that ties environmental or social activities into the work that people are doing day to day. A good example is what we call our LEAF program, our Lean Environmental Action Framework, where colleagues can earn a Six Sigma Green Belt while executing a component of our environmental strategy that's relevant to their job. It's a really nice combination of like a learning and development certification program and something that brings our environmental strategy to life. There are volunteer opportunities through our employee resource groups and through what we call our community builders, people who work at the local level. We have a bunch of offices around the world, people who work at the local level to bring people together. And then we have dedicated roles with a focus on inclusion, community, sustainability, or ESG in a bunch of our different functions. A dedicated role on ESG reporting and finance, a dedicated role on sustainable sourcing in our sourcing team. So, there are these levels, different pathways for how people across the organization can interact with our sustainability and inclusion initiatives. But what is really fundamental to the way that we work is to treat it in a way that it remains all connected. It's so important not to silo this type of work in your organization. And it's so important not to create a program of work that is distinct from the way that your products and services are delivered. So our Business Inclusion Council, for instance, is the mechanism by which we ensure that our products and services, our editorial policies, our publishing practices are as inclusive as possible, but that's a component of our overall integrated inclusion and sustainability strategies. And making sure that, there is a strong connection across the organization and a strong connection to the core business is the approach that we take. What we believe is that fundamentally, especially in these areas, we're playing the long game. And so making sure that there is a mechanism for robust, funded, supported activities over the long term is the way that we approach bringing our environmental, social, and governance strategies to life. I think maybe that's what I'll say by way of introduction, and I'll hand things over to Dana.
Thanks, Bill. I want to say first that I love that you talked about the financial aspect of all of this work, because I'm going to be speaking specifically from the perspective of somebody who is leading publications at a society nonprofit publisher. But despite that, one of the sayings that we use quite frequently, even in the society world, is nonprofit is a tax status, not a business model. While we don't have fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, our board does have fiduciary responsibility to maintaining a financially sound organization. And so a lot of the things that you said, despite my bringing a nonprofit society perspective here specifically, really resonate. So a little bit about ASCE. So American Society of Civil Engineers. We're a professional membership society. We have about 160,000 members across the world. So we have members in 177 countries. So again, we're an American society, but we're a global organization. We represent the broad range of subdisciplines that fall under civil engineering and are largely organized as such, from structural engineering to geotechnical, environmental, and so forth. I specifically oversee our publications program as well as our standards development office. We're an ANSI accredited standards developer. Our publications portfolio is 35 research journals. We also publish conference proceedings, books, and as I said, standards. And on the publication side as well, we're quite global. So about 80%, give or take, of our journal content comes from countries outside of the United States. So, when we think about both the organizational mission as well as our strategic goals within publications, we are really trying to respond to the needs of our community around the world, not just the United States. And I think it's important to lean on the ASCE organizational mission, which is to lead the civil engineering profession to, and it precisely says, sustainably advance and protect the health, safety, and welfare of all. And when I think about sustainability and DEI at ASCE, I specifically lean on those two words that managed to make it into our organizational mission statement. We are about sustainability and we are about all communities. And so without both a focus on advancing sustainable infrastructure and embedding the communities that we serve within our profession, we aren't delivering on our organizational mission. So Soumya mentioned dedicated roles within the organization, as did Bill. So I will point out that the size of ASCE as compared to Springer Nature and Wiley is quite different, right? We have fewer than 250 employees overall, and 43 in publications and standards. So when we start thinking about how many devoted resources do we have for sustainability and DEI, the number is quite small. We do have a chief sustainability officer as well as a chief resilience officer, and we do have a director for cultural belonging and social ethos, essentially filling that DEI need for the workforce and the profession. But when it comes to advancing these values through the rest of the organization, this is truly everybody's job at ASCE, right? So in publications and standards specifically, we reorganized our strategic plan in 2021 to revolve around 6 guiding principles. And 3 of those actually are sustainability, DEI, and accessibility. So a full 50% of our strategic plan in publications and standards revolves around precisely what we're talking about today. And when I think about how, kind of the aspects of what we try to deliver on specifically within my team, we're looking to advance sustainability and DEI through our content, through our editorial ecosystem, and internally within our staff team. So I'll just speak a little bit about those 3 areas, both from the organizational perspective as well as my team's perspective. So on the content side, some of the things that we do actually are based entirely on the SDG framework. We collect our content into packages based on SDGs that are relevant in the research that we publish. We really took a kind of bottom-up approach to this in terms of identifying which SDGs our content aligns most closely with, and then we collect our content as such. We work with our authors and our editors to ensure everything that pertains to a particular SDG is identified as such, because what we were finding before we started specifically leaning on the SDG framework was that the content got lost in the shuffle. We published so much that it was very difficult for readers and users to be able to tell what content was related to sustainable and resilient infrastructure. When it comes to our editorial ecosystem, and Soumya, your team is way ahead of mine in this, but we are deeply invested in ensuring that things like our editorial boards have representation, that we're bringing diverse voices together for the good of the research, and really leaning on the concept that diverse teams can be more creative and more innovative, and that will be good for our publications portfolio at large. When it comes to our internal staff, this looks like everything from refining our hiring practices to ensure we're equitable, that we're, conducting interviews in a culturally competent way, to fun things like hosting a DEI book club that's hosted by our staff DEI committee. So we're really trying to embed this into all of our operations throughout the team. And again, to my earlier point, ensuring that everybody within our division understands that every job is a sustainability job and every job is a DEI job. And I guess the last thing I would say on the standards development side, although it's publications, this is where we're really talking about content development created by consensus bodies. But we did, with our recent standards revitalized business plan and the advent of a dedicated standards office, embed a couple of guiding principles there as well, that every standard needs to take into account practices for development of both sustainable and resilient infrastructure and reflect the most recent climate science. So I think I'll stop there so we can move on to a more open discussion, but thanks so much.
Thank you all for your observations. I think we've given our audience a good overview of the different organizations and how you all interact in this area. So the first question I'm going to ask you all, and Dana, maybe if you can start with this one. If DEIA and/or SDGs are part of the strategic plan of an organization, how do you ensure that there's company-wide focus on that part of the plan? In other words, that it's not just lip service in a plan. And then if they aren't part of the strategic plan, how do you incorporate those values into the work life of the organization?
So I suppose my first blush answer would be that I feel very fortunate that ASCE already has the values embedded into the overall strategic plan, because by nature, that makes me feel supported, that when I focus resources within my team on advancing sustainable content, on things like an equity audit to determine what we need to do to improve our editorial boards, when I, put resources towards fun things like a DEI book club, that both our executive leadership as well as our member leadership, volunteer leadership, understand that I am acting in keeping with the organization's values. With that said, it is, I think, always going to be a challenge, and I'm going to lean specifically into this, ensuring that every corner of the organization is taking similar approaches. It is challenging, I think, to message exactly the point I was trying to make earlier, that every job has a component of this, because I think it is human nature to some extent to want to say, well, that's outside my job description, or that's more work than what my job is really supposed to be. So I think tying everything back to outcomes, right? How to Bill's point, right? How can we tie some of the actions to revenue growth? How can we tie actions to increase in journal submissions? How can we tie actions to reduced expenses by diversifying our vendor, portfolio? I think when you can show actual outcomes, I think it becomes a little bit easier for both departments and individuals to embrace, here are the actions I can take for positive outcomes in my particular goal area, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Salmia, did you have a comment along those lines?
I think I want to actually pick up on a point that Dana made in her opening statement about DEI, sustainability, SDGs. Everybody in the organization is responsible for it. It's not just the people who have it in their titles. And the way to reach that is to really embed it into the fabric of the organization, make it part of the organizational culture, and have the support from the senior leadership to do that and to build it into the organizational strategy. Now, having said that, we do have it as part of our organizational strategy. We're also a very large and diverse organization with many different product lines, if you will. And DEI sustainability has to be embedded into that vision. It can't sit outside of that. And partly what that means is the different parts of the organization will have to adapt and adopt it in a way that aligns with their overall, let's say, business or performance strategy. So different parts of the organization are going to be moving at different paces, depending on what is most important. So for example, on the journal side, focusing on regional diversity of our academic editors is a big focus, right? But on the education side, which is a completely different business line within Springer Nature, focusing on inclusivity in the content they create for educators is really, really important. The language, the themes, the representation. So, and I think what we're trying to do is align on the values, but create flexibility in terms of what that means in a very precise way for the actions we take and make sure that's integrated with what we're doing overall. So then it makes it that much easier to actually implement if you integrate it into an overall sort of business and editorial and commercial and publishing vision.
Great, thank you. And Bill, I'm going to turn to you next, but then ask you to also answer the next question, which is how do you measure the success and impact of these activities?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for the next question, actually, because I think it dovetails really nicely. Ding is absolutely right. Ding said a couple of minutes ago that, at Wiley, at all of our organizations, it is important that we measure the sustainability and inclusion impact on financial performance and other business health factors like reputation health. I mean, we do a kind of sentiment analysis of our authors, our customers, other groups that assesses the extent to which they perceive Wiley to be making choices that are in the best interest of the environment and society, and to what extent that informs their decision to remain with us. So some of these analyses that connect with other organizational health measures, financial and non-financial, is a big part of what we do. We set targets that affect the enterprise. I think to Samia's point about making sure that there is a connected, aligned vision across the organization, I think it's also important to make sure that there is a connected, aligned set of targets across the organization, and we do target setting that affects the enterprise. A good example, our net zero target, you heard this in Samia's opening remarks. We also have a target to be net zero in our operations and across our value chain by 2040. We're tracking really well against that. Within each of our functions all contribute in different ways. And there'd be no way that we could come close to that target if our facilities leadership team and our publishing leadership team were misaligned. So there's a whole lot of leadership alignment that we do around target setting and on gathering the data to report progress against those targets. You asked about measurement. Personally, I'm a big believer in measurement frameworks. I think I love frameworks generally. I'm a big believer in measurement frameworks. And there are a bunch out there, especially in the research space, that connect publications and other forms of content to their societal impact. The Research Excellence Framework in the UK, or the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences Framework in Canada, the Productive Interactions Framework. I think, in my view, though, the industry is still missing an overarching framework that makes this connection explicit for us. What I've seen so far predominantly focuses on risk management rather than value creation, and I think there's a ton of value to be created by investing in sustainability and inclusion initiatives. I think social considerations, social dimensions are often treated as kind of vague, unmeasurable afterthoughts. And I think that's problematic because, of course, there are ways to measure social impact. I think that connection to business performance is a gap in most of the measurement frameworks I've seen, most of the third-party available measurement frameworks I've seen, and a relationship with business strategy. So I think, I'd love to see more effort across the industry in designing a framework that measures the impact of social, inclusive, sustainable publishing and publishing operations activities.
Great, thank you. Dana, I saw you shaking your head. Do you have anything to add to that?
Probably nothing valuable, but it just made me think, like, is there a net promoter score kind of metric that one could develop that takes into account things like culture survey results, financial performance, and environmental impact? It seems like there should be something there that's basically an amalgamation of the three aspects of ESG.
Yeah, like an index. I know I'm dying for one. And actually, I've been playing around with some, like just personally. If anyone has any great ideas, I'd love to connect.
Salmi, anything to add to that?
So I think the one thing I would say is this is one of the most challenging aspects, right, of this type of work. And certainly there are quantitative aspects, clear quantitative metrics, that things that you can measure. So for example, SDG relevant research, you can measure, you can count how many articles you published that are relevant to the SDGs. Sustainability, if you as an organization have a commitment to net zero, it's very, very careful, very detailed frameworks that you have to align with and be consistent with and report on as well. But I would say that, when it comes to some of the more qualitative aspects of the impact of these programs and organizational culture and sense of belonging, inclusion, that is much harder. So one of the things we do to understand that and to measure that is our annual inclusion and diversity survey. It's very comprehensive, and that really gives us a handle on the impact of this work on the culture within the organization. On the external side, there's a lot you can think about measuring, but actually for an organization at our scale, it's very challenging to do some of these measurements in real time, to be tracking diversity of your reviewers. It's challenging. So we're not there yet, but one of the things that we are committed to and are measuring is the regional diversity of our academic editors-in-chief and our academic editors, and also looking at the inferred gender diversity of that group, which is a very large group. I would say more generally, I think you have to think carefully about where you as an organization are likely to have the greatest impact, and where you think putting your efforts into is going to be the most important for the communities you serve, for your organization, and then think about what you can measure, because you can't measure everything and you can't have impact across, all possible aspects of these programs.
Right. Yeah, so the next question, I mean, you all obviously have these programs embedded in your organizations now, but when we were starting to discuss this session, one of the things we talked about was the pushback that you sometimes get when you're starting to bring these programs into your organization in a structured way. And one of the statements we discussed was people who say, we're all good people here when institutional change is being proposed. So how do you respond to a statement like that, or did you respond to a statement like that? And I think we'll start this one with Dina.
Sure, thanks, Lori. And I know during our planning meeting, I said this really resonates with me because several years ago, I want to say it was 2020, actually, the first time we had to do our annual editors workshop virtually, we first started talking with our editors about the concept of editorial board diversification and that kind of thing. And this is precisely the response that we got is, well, there's not a problem with my editorial board. I know everybody on my editorial board personally, and they're all great. And we all kind of went, oh, you know everybody on your editorial board personally. That is the problem right there. It's too much of an echo chamber, but many of our editors are convinced that because the folks that they have personally invited to their editorial boards are the best in their field, that there isn't an issue with not being broader in terms of participation and inclusion. And I bring that right back to digging into the data, which we have had trouble doing, just in terms of our systems and being set up to gather this kind of demographic information and analyze it, but we're getting there. I mentioned earlier, we recently, and I should have mentioned, I think, when I was talking about resources, not to get off track, that I was fortunate enough to actually add a dedicated position within publications for DEIA strategy a couple of years ago. And Demita Snow, I think, is actually even on the call, champions these efforts. But, you know, what we've really been working on, and Demita has been spearheading, is we need to be able to get the data in front of the editors, and we need to be able to tie targets to impact. So if you can meet X target, we believe, right, because a hypothesis will resonate, we believe that this would be an eventual outcome. So again, I think when we're dealing in, especially the science community, tying everything back to data and outcomes resonates. The other thing I would say is we've taken a few different tacks in terms of our communication, and there are always differences between staff talking with editors, independent, external consultants, experts, whatever you want to refer to them as, talking with editors versus editors with real life experience talking to their peer editors. And I think it's that last dynamic that can really move the needle in terms of opening minds to actually this is important and has tangible benefit. So a couple thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks. How about Bill next?
Yeah, I also love the question. I think whenever I think about large scale change programs and you know, creating more inclusive publishing practices or creating more sustainable organizational operations are large scale change programs. Whenever I think about those, my favorite change management framework is the ADKAR model: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And the notion that, you know, there's not a problem here, we're good people, no need to look here, we're fine, says to me that there is an awareness issue. So I agree with Dana's approach that like data working to solve that awareness issue is a fundamental step. Once you do that, though, I think where a lot of people underestimate is in the desire phase of change programs. So not only bringing to people's attention that there is in fact a gap and that gap is problematic, but helping them want to make a change by helping them understand a stronger vision for what the journal or the organization could look like if it were more diversified, if it had more inclusive practices, if it were more sustainable, helping them realize a path to helping them see a path to realizing that vision, helping them kind of get on side with the change that you're looking to make is a whole program of work unto itself. And I think it's absolutely right to start with raising awareness, but you know, I find it's really important to very swiftly move into creating desire from there.
Great, thank you. And Salmi, I'm actually going to add the last question into this because we want to leave time if there are questions from the audience. So the last question we were going to tackle is the challenges you face in your role as champion of DEIA or sustainability programs. And I think, you know, the two questions certainly fit together.
Yeah, thanks, Laurie. So I just want to echo really what Dana and Bill have said. So the approach we take is data to create awareness. So data focusing on the disparities in our networks relative to what we know about the diversity of the global research community. And really share that with the stakeholders, whether they're external editors or internal editors and publishers who can drive change. Second, we've done a lot of work on training around understanding and mitigating implicit bias in the publishing journey. And we build these data insights into that training so that it's not sort of, and it's not just sort of, you know, abstract, but it's grounded in an understanding of disparities within our networks. And the final thing that we are doing is showcasing peer examples. So really editor case studies, examples of journals and book series where the editors or series editors have really put effort into a DEI vision and the positive impact of that for building the journal's reputation, growing its authorship base, and so on. So I think that those approaches for culture change are really aligned across what Dana, Bill, and I have just said. Now I've forgotten the second part of the question.
Challenges that you
Yes, challenges. I think the biggest challenge is, well, partly the scale and the diversity of the organization. It's, on the one hand, a tremendous opportunity, but it's also challenging. And I think the second challenge is everybody has a lot on their plate. Everybody is trying to do a lot. And really working to make it business as usual and to change that mindset so that it's really part and parcel of what you do in order to create a high quality, ethical, high integrity publication. And you just have to be patient, you know. This type of work takes years in it to make progress on. So
Great. Dana or Bill, anything to add to that?
I mean, I would say, I was pausing to see if Dana spoke first, but I would say, do you know, like, I don't know if this is the place to admit it, it's lonely. Like the work, you're often a lone voice on an issue early on in a discussion. And, you know, that kind of wears on you. I've spent one of my personal areas of focus, part of my personal leadership philosophy is that everyone should find joy in their work lives. That like creating the conditions for people to find joy in their work lives is a fundamental aspect of being a leader. And I've studied this for like more than a decade at this point. It really boils down to three things. You need to have a personal purpose that aligns with the purpose of the organization that you're working at. You need to have the right balance between your challenge and your skill level. And you need to be part of a strong social support network in the workplace. And this type of work, you know, you can find the purpose for days. There's absolutely no issue with understanding that the work that you're doing has positive long-term impact on the organization that you're a part of, on the communities that you serve, and on the world. But those other two, the challenge skill level mix, you know, there's always a new challenge. It's a very wide-ranging set of responsibilities that come within this work. So the challenge skill level mix is a little bit tricky. And until you kind of find your tribe of other people who are inclusive, sustainable advocates, finding that social support network in the workplace takes a little while. So those are the two that I'd call out.
Dana?
I'm not sure that I have much to add on top of what Bill and Somia have already offered up. I echo everything. Um, but I'm very curious if the audience has any questions.
Yeah, so I haven't noticed any. I've noticed a really nice chat going on, which is wonderful. So why don't each of you kind of sort of sum up your point of view, I guess, and then Susan and Bex, if you happen to see questions that I missed, please let me know. We've got a couple of others if we've got some time left. So let's start with Bill.
I think this probably picks up on what we were just talking about. But if I had to, if I had to give one piece of advice, I would say that the first thing someone should do when they're thinking about upgrading or launching a program dedicated to inclusion or sustainability or the SDGs is to find a band of collaborators. And they don't need to be a part of your organization. Good ideas are everywhere. But people who have had similar experiences, people who have transferable skills, people who have ideas that aren't yours, people that you feel safe bouncing your ideas off of, is such a critical part of this work. So I'd advocate that for anyone who wants to make their organization more sustainable, more inclusive, is to find your collaborators inside and outside of the organization.
Great, thank you. Dana?
Sure. I think any work that is intended to advance social values is inherently overwhelming. I think all of these things can immediately, when you start thinking, how can I or how can my organization really have a measurable impact on world challenges, it's easy to say, I don't have enough staff, we don't have enough resources, there's not enough money, it's not a priority. There are no end to the list of reasons not to. And I think coming from a little bit of a smaller organization, although a very large society, it doesn't have to be everything all at once. It's, there's never going to be a finish line. You're never going to have solved all the challenges. So just do something. There are resources, there are colleagues to talk to who care about the work, who can give some starting points, maybe help you figure out to work within your constraints. But I would say figure out what, kind of meshes with the values of your organization. And if you can identify one small action, it is a stepping stone to much larger things.
Great, thank you. And Salmia will.
I just want to echo actually Bill and Dana on both of those points. Just start somewhere and work with you need people you can talk to and who can work alongside you internally and externally. I think that is really important.
Great, well, thank you all. I don't see any questions. We've got 3 minutes left. So I do want to thank our panelists for all of your insightful remarks today and your responses to the questions. Thank you to all the attendees for joining us and for the conversations that you had in the chat there. It's always good to see what other people are doing. And this conversation, of course, will continue. I also want to thank C4DISC and SSP for sponsoring this webinar. It's a really important topic, and as you have all indicated, one that doesn't end, but can only get better with each of our organizations. Sue has put the webinar evaluation form on the screen. And so please feel free to send your input and feedback. And we look forward to presenting more webinars in the future. Thank you all and have a good day.